Good afternoon. Robert Scribbler here with the OBX Wave Report, where I discuss for you all things waves, weather, climate, and beaches. And today we got out for another dawn patrol session today. I got out with a new surfer, Louise, over at Jeanette's Pier. Waves were small today this morning, in the range of about 1 foot, maybe 1.5 foot. And here is a shot from the south side of the pier, looking out to the southeast as golden rays of sunlight stream down. This shot taken from a video earlier today available on YouTube if you guys want to check it out. But we did get out into the water. There were about four other surfers out there and got some decent little rides, although these waves are like let's say more on the small end, probably. eh, I mean, I don't know. I say about 1.5, but might even have been a little smaller than that. I was using the Lost Rocket, and that these waves might have been just a little bit too small. Didn't have enough speed to get like a full stand up on these waves. Did get a few pop-ups with like a hand on the board surface, like crouching really low to maintain some of the speed on the wave. But nonetheless, it was good to get out, practice your pop-ups, get out in the water, and also great to get out and teach a new surfer, Louise, and get introduce a new surfer to the sport, which is always just really a blast. And then after our surf session, I did get some shots of the waves also to the south of the pier, this from the pier as well. And you begin to see the influence of these strong north winds that are starting to blow in off the Atlantic Ocean. And we're getting gale force gusts right now, or near gale force gusts in the range of 33 miles per hour with sustained winds in the 20s. So pretty windy here, and we expect to see the waves getting larger and larger as those north winds continue to blow. And gale force winds are going to be really the rule of the week for the North Atlantic Ocean for this coming week. And we're going to get into that a lot with the wave report today. So a couple of shots from the beach this morning. Um, Still struggling with trying to figure out a way to get the live stream up at the beach. It just doesn't seem like the data streams are able to manage the kind of data that I'm sending. But we'll do our best and we'll do our best to get you guys timely information. But more importantly, with these daily wave reports, we're going to provide you guys with a forecast for the coming days, looking at all of the best information that I can find in the models on waves and weather for the Outer Banks. All right, so let's get down to the wave report. And I did want to talk about this series of gales that is expected to, or that are expected, a series of gales is expected to affect the North Atlantic. And even right now, we've got, let's make sure we are on the now. Yep, we are on the now. So even right now, we've got a very strong storm system here in the center of the North Atlantic. And the storm system is generating winds in the strong gale force variety, sustained winds in the 50 to 60 mile an hour range over a broad circulation here out in the North Atlantic. And this zone here in the central North Atlantic is going to become ground zero for just a big base swell that's going to ripple all across the North Atlantic this week. And here for the Outer Banks, we're going to see a series of nor'easters form here off the US East Coast and then track on out into this big bomb zone out here where the storms are going to broaden and get wider, reinforcing the swell time and time again. And I'm going to go ahead and show you the progression of the winds and the swirling winds over the waters here in this series before I get down to observations for the lower 48 or for the Outer Banks. So right now we've got winds in the near gale force range off the Outer Banks coming in from the north. And these winds are expected to prevail and even intensify throughout the day as a strong low pressure system sweeps on off the coast and then develops here south of Newfoundland. And you can see the frontal boundary and the large swath of northerly winds behind it. And then even further to the north, you have this large swath of northerly and easterly winds running across the North Atlantic toward Newfoundland, generating a lot of fetch and starting to develop that large base swell that we expect to see. And so this model, I'm going to keep pushing it out. This by early Wednesday morning, and then as we get into the day on Wednesday, the storm off Newfoundland strengthens, and we still have that large fetch, just a massive field of wind driving from Iceland all the way down to Bermuda, basically. And that big fetch is just going to keep blowing and blowing and blowing, and we're going to get a big old base swell. Now, it's worth noting that there is a south side to this series of storms as well, which is generating a massive fetch running in toward Ireland and France and Portugal. So on the other side of the Atlantic, they're going to get big waves as well. So it's big waves for both sides of the Atlantic, and I'm providing the analysis right now, showing you where the winds are going to go and generally where the waves are going to go. So then as we get into the day, let's see, this is Thursday in the model. We have another giant, big, kind of balmish low pressure system out here in the central North Atlantic with sustained wind speeds in the 60-mile-per-hour range north of the system in the more intense fields. And again, this massive area of fetch running from Iceland and then heading on down toward Bermuda. And it just continues in this way. So then as we get into Friday, the low kind of moves a bit more toward Greenland. And yet we still have these northerly winds helping to sustain the swell. And then on the south side of the storm, southwesterly winds coming in toward Europe. So more big waves. This as we get into the day on Friday. And then as we get into the day on Saturday, we get another low starting to form here over the US East Coast that is expected to sweep on offshore and become yet another gale. So another gale forming off the US East Coast on Friday and into Saturday and deepening and becoming rather strong. This storm system expected to drop down to the 970 millibar range. So very strong storm here off the US East Coast, again producing large waves. And we're going to get into the wave models a little bit later, but what I wanted to show you was the general tendency of strong northeasterly winds and northerly winds to develop from Iceland over here toward Bermuda, and that's going to generate a massive fetch and a massive groundswell. All right, so getting down to the lower 48 and getting down to some more local readings and present readings. Right now, we are experiencing very clear skies and strong northwesterly winds here in the Outer Banks. And this, as a low pressure system, is intensifying off the US East Coast. We've got some stormy weather out west. Again, with another impulse moving in through the coastal areas of California, particularly northern and central California, Oregon, and Washington, and a broader low pressure trough frontal system here in the central US, which is going to be our next big storm system for the US East Coast, and then getting offshore to help generate the waves. And here in the enhanced satellite picture, we have the cold cloud tops off the US East Coast showing where that next nor'easter is forming off the US East Coast. We've got the enhanced clouds showing up for the US West Coast, showing the most recent barrage of storms striking the West Coast. And then we've got that feed of moisture coming in from the Pacific and from the Gulf of Mexico, firing up storms along the central US along a frontal boundary and a trough area. Now, here in the Outer Banks, we are under gale warnings, and these gale warnings will probably continue throughout the day and into tomorrow. And don't know. I mean, it seems like we're going to get pretty strong winds coming in from the north for at least the next few days. So it's going to be strong north winds and growing surf, larger and larger surf as we progress. And then as we get into the day on Saturday, we are going to see a storm system offshore as well, and it does look like the waves are going to kick up even more, and we might see some 9, 10, 11-foot waves off certain locations in the Outer Banks. Some of these waves might be really hollow. Um, these waves coming in from the north and east with that swell that I've been talking to you about. So if we get strong winds coming in from the west on the backside of a front pushing through on Saturday with those big waves rolling in, we might have some big old hollow barrels. And so we shall see. This might be interesting. Um, we're going to have to keep an eye out for it. But I think Avon and Buxton particularly might be some interesting spots. Okay, so zooming out, we've got some small craft advisories and gale warnings up for the West Coast for the most recent area of disturbed weather. And for the central US, we've got some winter storm warnings up for parts of Minnesota and some disturbed weather in Oklahoma, Kansas, parts of Texas, and New Mexico. Looking at the NOAA quantitative prediction forecast, we do have a tendency for severe weather for the US West Coast over the next 7 days. We've got a tendency of heavy precipitation for the central United States, particularly running through Oklahoma, parts of Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and Tennessee and Georgia. And then here off the US East Coast, we see the tendency for nor'easter formation as well as the associated precipitation. All right, so let's get down to our local observations for right now, and then we're going to get into the wave forecast, which is actually pretty exciting. It's looking kind of big. Okay, so right now at Jeanette's Pier, waves are in the range of 1 to 2 foot. These waves will tend to build throughout the day as we get those strong north winds, and we're already starting to see the influence of those strong north winds coming in. And right now, winds are out of the northwest at around 20 miles per hour sustained, with gusts up to 33 miles per hour, which are near gale force. The primary swell is coming in at 8 seconds, secondary swell coming in at 11 seconds. Air temperatures right now 55 degrees. Temperatures will tend to fall throughout the day with those north winds coming in. Ocean water temperatures at 53 degrees, actually a little bit warmer than it has been, and hopefully things will continue to warm up. I was out there in the surf today for about an hour, maybe a little more. Got a little cold in the hands, tips of the toes toward the end, but not too bad. Um, the expected high today of 61 has already happened. Temps will fall throughout the day with those north winds, and the winds are going to be strong, although likely mostly sunny today with some beautiful blue skies above despite those strong winds. Now, heading on down to the south, we're going to get to Rodanth. And at Rodanth, we see that the waves right now are in the range of 1 to 2 feet. And we've got west winds at 24 miles per hour with near gale force gusts. These winds will also tend to move toward the north throughout the day. And with those north winds being strong, we expect to see the waves starting to rise. Right now, the primary swell is coming in at 8 seconds there at Rodanth, and the secondary swell coming in at 11 seconds. Air temperatures 59 degrees and falling. Ocean water temperatures also at 63 degrees. And the expected high today of 61 was also already reached. Temperatures, again, are expected to fall throughout the day. We expect windy conditions with gale force or near gale force gusts and sunny skies. And then heading on down to Buxton for our final location for today. Right now, waves at Buxton are in the range of 2 to 3 feet. We've got strong, very strong west northwest winds at 25 miles per hour with near gale force gusts as well. Primary swell coming in at 8 seconds, secondary swell at 11 seconds. Air temperatures right now about 63 degrees. Ocean water temperature is considerably warmer at 60 degrees. And the high today is expected to be about 63, so we've already hit that. And temperatures at Buxton are expected to fall throughout the day with those strong north winds coming in and bringing in the cooler air. All right, so let's get down to some discussion. I want to talk about some of the prevailing patterns that are ongoing. And I did talk yesterday about some warm air invasions of the Arctic. And right now, we've got much warmer than normal temperatures over Baffin Bay and Greenland, although you guys might look at these blues and think, oh, well, that's not that much warmer than normal. But typically, this whole region of Baffin Bay, it tends to be very, very frigid and very cold at this time of year. So it's rather warmer than normal in the range of 30, 40, even 50 degrees Fahrenheit above normal in some locations. And then here in the Arctic, you can actually see the warm air invasion in the temperature monitors as this pathway of like light blue through the purples. It's almost as if the warmer airs have just cut like a slash up through the Arctic here. So we have this warm air invasion of the Arctic that has knocked out this chunk of refugee cold, and this chunk of refugee cold is expected to sink on down to the south and east over the coming days. And I'll show you um, the models for temperature anomalies. So here, for example, near Barrow, Alaska, we've got air temperatures in the range of about 40 to 40 to 50 degrees Fahrenheit above normal, and a large swath of above normal temperatures running in through the Arctic Ocean. And then over Baffin Bay, you've got temperatures in the 40 to 50 degree Fahrenheit above normal range as well, and over parts of Greenland and the Canadian archipelago, as well as parts of Hudson Bay. And this warm air is expected to remain for the most part, and then the cold air that's kind of a refugee is expected to shift south and east over the coming days. And I'm going to go ahead and show you this in the model. So by March 10th, we've got some cold air sinking down, and this cold air is coming into conflict with warm air to the south, warm air particularly over the moist Atlantic Ocean and the moist Gulf of Mexico. And whenever those air masses come into conflict, you could have some severe weather, and this is what looks like maybe helping to fuel the nor'easter potential off the US East Coast as we get into mid-March here. And so day after day, you've got these colder impulses slamming into warmer than normal air masses. So you have the potential for some stormy conditions. And you can see that in the development of gales over the Atlantic Ocean. And we do have some enhanced risk of nor'easters as well. And I did want to try, oh, here we go. The Climate Prediction Center did finally load. So over the next 8 to 14 days, we expect to see some below normal temperatures here for the Outer Banks, and precipitation is expected to be above normal. Worth noting that there's a big hotspot for severe weather out here, potentially for California. So California is again under the gun for severe weather. You guys might want to keep an eye out for your meteorological forecasts and listen to your emergency management folk as the days and weeks progress. This is an 8 to 14 day outlook provided by the Climate Prediction Center over at NOAA. And there is an indicator that basically from March 14th to March 20th, we might have some pretty severe weather out here for California. So just keep a weather eye on that. Here in the Outer Banks, we're expected to see above normal precipitation, below normal temperatures, might get kind of stormy out there in the North Atlantic. And that's actually what we're expecting to see over the coming week. For severe weather and particularly severe thunderstorms over the next 3 days, there's nothing too much in the way of risk, although there is some marginal enhancement of risk for Texas, Oklahoma, parts of Kansas, parts of Arkansas over the next 3 days. Okay, so let's get down to some of the models. All right, so right now we've got a nor'easter off the US East Coast helping to push in those north winds and larger swells over the day today and into tomorrow. That thing is going to head on offshore and strengthen right out there in the mid-Atlantic and provide this fetch, this strong wind coming off the backside of this storm for a long period of time, which is going to help build up the swell here in the Outer Banks. And then over the central US, you have a second gathering storm, which will turn into another nor'easter as we get into the weekend. And so you can see the storm gathering as we get into early Friday. And you also see this other strong impulse of severe weather sweeping in through the Pacific with the predicted series of lows expected to come in there. Now we've got, for the East Coast, we've got the front beginning to form and the low pressure deepening and sweeping on through the Outer Banks by Saturday, with the low transferring its energy offshore. Later, a little bit later, well, actually, this is early in the morning on Saturday still. And then later in the day on Saturday, the storm is expected to be quite a weather event for the US Northeast and bring in strong northerly winds behind it as it strengthens. And as we get out into this model, we do see a 970 millibar system, and that's a very strong low pressure system. This predicted for Saturday. This is a bit closer in the model, so we're not quite into grain of salt territory. And I do want to just note this field of snowfall here for parts of the Northeast, particularly for eastern Massachusetts, parts of Rhode Island, possibly Long Island. That looks like a very severe snow type system for mid to late Saturday, as well as a very, very severe wind, possible coastal flooding event as well. So just stay tuned to your weather statements as this nor'easter intensifies in the 970 millibar range and then tracks on offshore on Sunday. 972, that is a very strong storm. So yeah, basically a hurricane force low pressure system out there off the US East Coast. Although the winds might not be hurricane force, it's basically going to have about as much energy as a hurricane. So pretty severe storm out there predicted for Sunday. And then that thing is expected to head on offshore. And then we get this series of impulses off the US East Coast. Nothing too crazy, but nonetheless, it just remains stormy. Note the rains and the clouds and the north wind. These storms developing off the US East Coast have the tendency to sweep on offshore and then head toward that bombification zone right in the central North Atlantic. So I would expect waves to be pretty big over the next couple of weeks as the storm systems develop and head on off the US East Coast. As we get to the end of this model, we do see a strong storm developing here along the Gulf Coast and then tracking on off to the east, developing a coastal low. And this is classic nor'easter weather here with a central low here over the coastal region of South Carolina, another low here off of Virginia Beach, and then another low down here in the Gulf of Mexico. So again, at the end of the model, a tendency for a strong nor'easter to form and linger at least for a couple of days off the US East Coast. And we'll just have to see if that happens with that cold air trying to rush south and slamming into that warm, moist air over the Gulf of Mexico and those warmer than normal Atlantic Ocean waters. We do have that potential for powerful nor'easter to form near the coast. We've had these powerful storms out in the Atlantic, and there's nothing to say that the weather pattern won't change to push those storms closer to shore. So we'll see. Something we're going to keep an eye on. Okay. So let's get into waves. Okay. I did kind of do a preamble of this thing that is happening now. And we're going to get to now. Let's get to the waves. And I'm going to put the little dot off of the Outer Banks, but I'm going to zoom out to the entire North Atlantic because I want you guys to see this. All right, so let's get closer to shore here on the Outer Banks. And I'm going to put it right off Jeanette's Pier because that's our local observation point. And already we can see that the swells are starting to kick up offshore off of Jeanette's Pier in the range of about 3.8 feet with those northerly winds coming in. Some of these swells are blown out because the wind field right now is still coming in from the west. So some of these waves are getting blown offshore. But as the tilt to the wind shifts more and more to the north, we're going to get those waves coming in. And they're going to get larger and larger and larger as you get more and more of that fetch coming in off the North Atlantic. And so I'm going to advance this model. So moving on to tomorrow, we've got those north winds. And so here in the near offshore environment here at Jeanette's Pier, we've got 8.5 foot significant wave heights. Big, big waves coming out of the north. Those waves won't entirely line up to shore, so we're likely to see 3 to 5, 3 to 6, I don't know, maybe 4 to 7 foot waves. We'll see. But nonetheless, big waves tomorrow with those strong northerly winds. And here you can begin to see that fetch developing from Iceland all the way down to Bermuda as the winds are kind of handed off from one storm to the next. You can see one storm here and one storm here, and you've got that fetch and you've got those big waves running diagonally from northeast to southwest across the North Atlantic. And then on the far side of the Atlantic, you got big waves coming in from southwest toward northeast and just this train of waves. So right here off of France, you've got 13 to 14 foot significant wave heights. Off of Portugal, you've got 10 to 11 foot. And off of Southern Ireland, you got 7 foot. And even here off of Great Britain, 10-foot significant wave heights. All right, so getting on into Wednesday, let's go ahead and advance. And then you got this boom. So you got this, the storm that's right off the US East Coast now heads offshore tomorrow and then gets out here south and east of Newfoundland on Wednesday and generates this big, massive swell in the central North Atlantic. And you've got this fetch again, just running from south and west of Iceland all the way down here to Bermuda. And here off of Jeanette's Pier, we have a big swell. This swell orienting more toward the east. Let's zoom in so you can see this. So the swell orientation is coming more directly towards shore, coming in from the east and heading towards shore. So it looks like Wednesday is going to be a big day, probably a good day for surf. Hopefully we can get out there and enjoy it. And then on the far side of the Atlantic, look at this big plug. You've got 32-foot significant wave heights off of Ireland, Britain, and France. In the near coastal waters, you've got 10-foot significant wave heights. But that plug is heading towards shore, so let's see how close it gets. I'm going to advance the model a little bit. Yikes. Okay, yeah, for France, we're looking at really big waves on, looks like Wednesday into Thursday. So massive swell arriving in France. So I don't know, for those of you who serve France, there is a big swell coming as a result of these big bomb low pressure systems. It is on the way. All right, so let's go back to now and then advance it because we do want to show you what's expected to happen to the Outer Banks. All right, so then as we get into the day on Thursday for the Outer Banks, as the big swell starts to tamp down for France, we have 5-foot significant wave heights in the near offshore environment. So still rather large waves coming in with that swell. And the big bomb zone here in the North Atlantic is just a massive wave pool. I mean, look at the size of this wave pool that is generated from the North Atlantic. This big storm system pushing waves into France and then pushing waves back toward the United States. this on Thursday, and then as we get into the day on Friday, the storm heads toward the central North Atlantic storm heads toward Greenland, and then we get our next storm starting to develop here off the US East Coast. And this storm is enhancing the waves for the Outer Banks in this time period, as we expect to see significant wave heights in the near offshore environment of 8 feet, this on Friday. And then as we get into Saturday, we expect these waves to start getting bigger. And I'm going to show you this thing. So this storm gets rather large and rather strong and produces a big swell. And as we get into the day on Saturday, some of that swell gets close to the Outer Banks. And let's see here. Um, so Wednesday is 8, Thursday 9, Friday 10, Saturday. So Saturday and Sunday, we expect to see. Just going to back this up to Saturday. So 9 to 10, maybe even 11-foot significant wave heights in the near offshore environment on Saturday. And that's when we expect to see some big waves potentially at places like Buxton and even in places like Jeanette's Pier, we expect to see some big waves on Saturday. And then as we get into the day on Sunday, these waves don't fall down too much because you've got this big wave generator out here that's actually strengthening as it heads offshore. And you've got the swell coming in from the northeast more directly towards shore. So waves in the range of 8 to 9 feet in the near offshore environment as we get into Sunday. So that's the story for the OBX wave report for today, a series of large and powerful North Atlantic Ocean gales expected to generate some big surf here for the Outer Banks and across the Atlantic over the coming days. These storms enhanced by a kind of a handshake with the Arctic as we have strong storms rushing up the North Atlantic toward the north, and we have an invasion of warm air coming through the Bering Sea, creating this pinch of cold air, which is serving to add some unstable fuel for storms to the south, and then warmer than normal ocean waters, also helping to fuel these powerful storms in the North Atlantic. All right, so thank you for joining me for the OBX wave report. And at the end of this wave report, as I typically do, I'm going to ask you all to please do everything you can to help speed the transition to clean energy being wind, water, solar, and electric vehicles. And this is going to help us save our coastlines to help reduce the harms to places like the Outer Banks and save them from the combined impacts of increasingly powerful storms driven by fossil fuel burning and rising oceans driven by fossil fuel burning, which is trapping more and more excess heat into the Earth's atmosphere. So thank you guys for joining me again. We've had some wonderful times here on the Outer Banks, and we're doing a little bit of handoff to the next generation when it comes to surfing. So let's preserve our beaches for them too. All right, so thanks for joining me, and I will be back with you